how did all this start? Well, to cut a long story short, Phillips, under tender, has sold a lot of kit and software into the new Papworth. So 7 cardiac catheter labs, a very large sleep centre, together with associated respiratory support, a good bit of patient monitoring, and cardiac ultrasound kit. So that is a 7-figure deal for Phillips. So, but a transaction, part of the tender and sale process. So, but in the course of that, Phillips started to work out that there was a fair bit of convergence in terms of values and approach between themselves and Papworth. So they value the fact that Royal Papworth Hospital has a wonderful legacy of innovation. Those of you who don't work in Papworth might not know, it is incredibly heavily committed to excellent outcomes and probably would see itself, John will correct me if I'm wrong, as a European leader when it comes to outcomes and innovation, particularly in cardiothoracic care. Phillips, on the other hand, has been innovating, they would say, for 125 years and regard their capacity to innovate as the reason for the longevity, one of the key reasons for the longevity of the company. They currently have about 1,200 people, nearly got that wrong, in Phillips in Europe, I beg your pardon, in the UK and Ireland firm, who are actively involved and devoted to innovation. And they're filing a hell of a lot of patent applications. I know that's not entirely, that's one marker as opposed to, say, licensing, which is another, but it's a strong marker of the amount of invention that's going on within the company. So you can see how that might pull them together more with Papworth. And they are developing a vision, which is about making the world healthier and more sustainable through the kind of innovation they're delivering. And they have a very specific target, which is to improve the lives of 3 billion people every year by 2025. So pretty lofty goals, but not necessarily something we would associate with a blue chip commercial company. So when did all this convergence piece start? Well, there's a nice picture of, let's make sure I get it right, there's Neil Mesher, that's what he really looks like. And there's Stephen Posey, that is definitely what he really looks like as well. When they signed a memorandum of understanding a few months ago. But this started with a dinner at the Association of British Health Tech Industries in 2017, where Neil was there, Stephen Posey was there, along with colleagues of Roland's from Cambridge University Hospitals and a colleague of Tracy's from Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust. That was a kind of general dinner about how the Cambridge cluster might work a bit more with the health tech and the med tech side as opposed to the pharma and biotech side. And out of that, there was a very specific stream of work which spontaneously developed between Papworth and Phillips. So earlier, at the beginning of last year, beg your pardon, Stephen took his executive team off to Eindhoven to sit down with the Phillips exec to work out what were the areas that they might want to do things together. And since then, they've had a weekly Friday morning executive call, tracking progress and detecting further opportunities. It all started off as pretty non-invasive, as I understand it, so they've learned to be a bit more poignant with each other when the occasion requires. So, being partners, my marriage is anything to go by, is not necessarily about being nice to each other all of the time. Yeah, there you go. So a lot of value alignment. So they spend a lot of their time talking about the things which bring them together in terms of aims, aspirations, and values, and that in turn is the basis for the trust that they're developing between each other. Using the word value in a slightly different sense, they're very keen on working out how they extract value for either party, but also recognizing that you don't necessarily get the same quantum of value in the same way at the same time. There are different ways in which you get benefit from working together. So commensurate with that, different approaches to what are you investing, what's the risk appetite, what rewards do you get. Some of that might be money, some of that, particularly on the Papworth side, might be bringing clinical capability to bear in the early development of products. But ultimately, they've got to be able to work together. You can have brilliant clinicians, but if they're tricky, boffy scientists and engineers within Phillips, but if they're tricky, it's not going to work. So how do they make sure they've got a human basis for the relationship. So what are they working on now and what's in the pipeline? So lung cancer screening, very commensurate with what's going on, one of the components of the NHS plan. So if you're, say, somebody like Karen Lightning-Jones from Roche with a cancer pipeline, or AZ with a cancer pipeline, the fact that you might be able to connect early detection through lung cancer screening into maybe being able to apply your drugs at stage 1 instead of stage 4. There might be a further convergence opportunity there. Secondly, point of care diagnostic testing. So those are the current activities that they're working on jointly. What's in the pipeline? Early identification and management of people with cardiothoracic conditions, advanced imaging, augmented reality, and to some of the points that Charlie was raising earlier, developing stroke pathway. So those are the points from Phillips. So Neil wrote me a long note and I crystallized those into the slides, and he said, yeah, they're okay. They are a reflection of what I was saying to you. But I, with his agreement, added an additional observation slide for kind of further thought. What Phillips is doing is it's getting to that classic make or buy decision-making point and deciding to buy rather than make elements of its R&D and its development. Why do it yourselves, in-house and slightly isolated from the market, if you can do it with expert clinicians, scientists adjacent to those clinicians, and increase your probability of having something which works not just as a bit of kit in itself, but in a pathway, and therefore increase its marketability. And we're getting similar kind of signals and approaches from other life science companies for the same reason. So expect some of the space that is available and the greater space which will be available in the next decade in and around the Cambridge Biomedical Campus to attract those folk. And I suspect if we were having this session in a year's time, we'll be able to tell some stories of further interest from other companies landing on the biomedical campus. But it's not just the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. It's interesting to see Michael in the room from the engineering and physical sciences side of the university. What is also attractive is the proximity between what's going on the biomedical campus and what's going on in West Cambridge and growing in West Cambridge. For example, the Maxwell Centre. What that says to those companies, if those things are so close together, that's a perfect read across to where we're going, not just in device development, but not in the clinical side of device development, but the engineering and physical science side. We've had 2 chief scientific officers so far from the big blue chips, including the Phillips chap, Homer Pean, who was knocked out by what he saw over at West Cambridge. But all this, in Neil Mesher's mind, is helping for a business transformation with Phillips itself. So what they're aiming to do is to move from, I put services there, but from being a goods company, but to use Neil's term, to a solutions company. And in fact, they have an objective now to move to 30% of their total revenue by 2023 should be from solutions rather than the sale of kit. And they want to build from there. Sounds a bit modest, but if you think Phillips is an electrical engineering company selling distinct goods, it is quite a transformation on which, from which they aim to grow. But also, and the same would apply to Charlie in the UCL environment, if you get started with these companies, they will almost certainly want to extend their interest elsewhere in the campus, given the quality, high quality of clinical services we got, the high quality of the science, in the same way that for Charlie at UCLH, you got outstanding clinical services and very good science as well. So it's a kind of stepping stone to more. So before we go to Tracy, what I wanted to do, well, first of all, I want to go that way. That way. Are we frozen? Well, we'll leave it there. But before we go on, we haven't got Stephen Posey here, but we have got John Warwick. So John is the chair of Papworth, but he is also a former practicing cardiac surgeon within the trust. So what I'm just going to put you on the spot, John, just ask you if you could compare and contrast this kind of convergent working with industry as demonstrated through these slides with what you've been used to. How different?
Okay. Yeah, I think the whole issue is to do with culture change. You know, a lot of you in the room will have been in medicine or around medicine for many years. And there's a time when pharmaceutical companies and other companies that come along, get hold of doctors and scientists, take them out to dinner, give them a conference, pay for their journey, and suck their brains dry. And it was very much a sort of kind of one-sided business. And it was felt very much, I think, those days there was the dark side and there was the sort of pure science and clinical side. This is all gone. This is now a big symbiotic relationship. And the Phillips issue came because we're building a new hospital and we're kitting out a new hospital. But as Malcolm said, there are other companies involved and looking at us and looking at other parts of the campus to have a proper symbiotic relationship. So that they get something out of this in terms of developing their stuff. We get something out of it in developing our services. One of the things that come out of Phillips, actually, which is we'll talk about next year, is that we're developing a new piece of kit to do some piece of work that we want to do that's innovative in the UK and worldwide. And rather than just having to deal with that ourselves, they come along and say, okay, we're here doing this. We're an engineering company. We're a company that does huge bits about development of large bits of kit. We will help you develop this as part of our relationship. So in fact, that helps us develop some new parts of the service pathway that they were not interested in, but nevertheless, it becomes a proper relationship. So I've not a great deal to add to what you'd said, but I think that the whole area means that it's a proper discussion. And the fact that you pointed out that we have these meetings every week, and it is not just a sort of love-in. I mean, people say, well, you know, we want to do this, you want to do that. Where we could best take the advantage to get the things going forward. So I agree with all that you've said. Stephen's not here. I have no idea what he was going to say, but no doubt next time he'll elaborate on that. But it is working well. And it's a model that I think other companies have come around our part of the campus, and I'm sure to the other parts of the campus, and are now really getting involved in the whole development in Cambridge. And I hope it's a great opportunity for everybody to develop further. So I think it's now a proper relationship, whereas before we all felt it was a little bit of a sort of kind of having our brains sucked clean, and that's no longer there. Okay.
Thanks very much, John. Okay. It'll be a bit tricky, and we are a bit, actually, I think we're running behind, but I'm very happy to take questions or refer to Slido. Anybody want to pick up on any of this? Janice.
Any other impacts that you found more broadly from partnering in industry in terms of sort of culture change and approach, both clinically and non-clinically, from these weekly meetings, for example?
Well, I think what happens is that, as I think Malcolm pointed out at the beginning, you're sort of sniffing around each other and wondering where you're going. Okay. And now it has become a proper partnership. So we know very much what they want out of it. We know what we want out of it. We've got a whole bunch, actually, of imaging doctors who are getting very concerned that, you know, we're being taken for a ride, but actually we're not being taken for a ride. Nobody's being taken for a ride. And I think that the thing that somebody asked earlier actually was, what are the outcomes of this? And if we can actually show that we can change patient pathways and get better outcomes, those are the measures that are going to say, how do these partnerships work? Rather than just a couple of guys getting together and saying, isn't it great that we're using our same kit and we're developing X and Y? It's how does that relate into better healthcare for your community? And one of our strap lines at our hospital, and we can use it all over the place, is that what we want to do is tomorrow's medicine today. So we don't want to be following, we want to be innovating. And we can only innovate if we're actually dealing with the people who are developing the new kit or the new drugs or the new forms of therapy. So it is part and parcel of that relationship. And it's back to that stuff that was all talked about 10 years ago, you know, bench to bedside and back. It is reality. And you can only do it with everybody involved. You can't just do it with a whole bunch of scientists and a whole bunch of clinicians. You've got to do it with industry, and you've got to do it with other departments within the university, particularly as somebody mentioned engineering, because we're very much into doing engineering stuff as well. So I think the collaboration is important. If one group of people can start doing that, then everybody else can start doing it. That's would, I think, probably answer your question.
Any more from the floor? Oh yes, Steve.
I mean, it just strikes me that we just have... Okay, stand up, Steve, because you looked at.
It's a question for both of you, really. We've just had a 10-year plan that, to many of us from the outside, doesn't look like it describes a transformed NHS in the next 10 years, but is a plan to carry on doing much of the same for the next 10 years. And I just wonder how we work with industry, how we work with science, and how we work. What's been missing for me is with citizens, because the way people lead their lives and the way they use technology is radically different from the way we provide it at the moment. So how do we use the content of this talk, the content of this room, the content of this city and its links to London to actually drive a radically different vision that I think then government has to respond to, rather than just kind of struggle on and mumble to us that it's going to keep the ship on the, ship afloat.
Do you want first dibs?
Well, Roland might want to dib at that. I don't think the 10-year plan actually does say it's going to be much the same as the same. I think it does say it's going to have to change and things are going to have to be done differently. We can't go on with a little bit more money. I mean, it's a lot more money you think, but actually it's a little bit more money. We can't go on doing the same things we do now. We've got to do we've got to do some of the things we do now differently, and we've got to decide somewhere along the line what we're not going to do. And that's a bigger debate than we're having in this room. This is to do with the debate about which bit of healthcare are we going to ration. And I don't want to get into that. But what we actually do, we've got to do it all differently. We can't go on the way we are now. Delivering, and the biggest change that's going to have to happen is how we involve social care and primary care, not the stuff that we're talking about today. I don't know whether, Roland, you would...
Sorry. Yes, thank you very much, John. And I'm Roland Sinker. I'm the Chief Executive at Cambridge University Hospitals, and I'm the Interim Accountable Officer for the STP, which is the health and care system for the 1 million people in the county. So the long-term plan, Steve, as you know, had 14 areas of action, and colleagues from the Cambridge system were co-leading or very active in writing, I think, 5 of those. 3 of us were co-leads of work streams in that. And really what the long-term plan says, I think, is 2 things. And you're absolutely right, Steve. The first half of the document says we've got to rebalance the ship. We're in, a state of some distress, and we've got to get the money in the right parts of the system. But I think the second half is much, much more exciting. And in that, we are talking about a much, much greater focus on primary care, general practice, integration with community services and social care, and bringing the expertise of the sort we've heard about from Royal Papworth and Phillips to really support our patients in a different way. And I think it's that second half where we talk about cancer, we talk about cardiovascular, Tracy will hear in a moment about mental health, that I think there's some very exciting opportunities. And the chapter on research, innovation and genomics, I think, is absolutely central to that journey.
Thanks very much. I think we're running a bit behind. So I just want to, and I think we'll come back to a lot of that in the panel discussion, I suspect. I just want to take the top one, because it also links to the third one, I think, on Slido. And a quick answer, the more the merrier. Both internally and externally, it'd be a bad idea to be having near monopoly relationships with particular parts of industry. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is what we have to learn in Cambridge, just came up in response to Charlie's talk, is how to work with the big, but also the medium and the small, and create the kind of full ecosystem.